Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You've got a split camp of across rugby where some people are saying it's banter, some people are saying it's a terrible thing to say. Now, if you park what was actually said and you just look at Joe Marler as a character, people praise him for adding value, adding colour to interviews and various different things he does on social media and around the game, and that's what we need. And we've talked about it on here. We need characters to open themselves up and show themselves to try and grow the game. Now, we've said that on here quite a few times, but in doing so, Joe Marler does it in a way that attracts attention. And people praise him for it, and people laugh with him and laugh at him sometimes, and it's all very jovial, and you get those pats on the back for it, and that's great. But when you step over the line, and this is my big thing on it, when you step over the line, and I 100% believe he's massively stepped over the line here, you have to take the criticism. You can't just get pats on the back and people are like, don't make him a scapegoat. Taboy Matson in an interview said, I hope Joe's not being made a scapegoat. But you tell me where you can look someone in the eye, anyone that you know, anyone that you work with in any job, rugby, wherever, and John Cooney backed this up on social media. People say it's banter. You look me in the eye and tell me anyone that thinks it's acceptable to look another human being in the eye and say, your mum's a fucking whore. It's just not acceptable, is it? It's not banter. And for Joe Marler then to say, it's my go-to line, makes it even worse for me. So John Cooney came out on social media, and we're big fans of John Cooney on here, and there was a reporter saying, it's just banter, there's been worse things said on a rugby field, and there probably has, but we're talking about the modern game and trying to make this, grow it for kids. And Joe Marler's been an advocate for social media. Joe Marler's been an advocate for mental health and growing the game and being, helping kids play the game. Well, you're not looking at that as a kid and thinking that's the way to behave. So I think there was a reporter on Twitter that said it was just banter, and then John Cooney came in and said, mate, you write articles. You've never been on a rugby field in terms of the professional league, and I've never heard that being said by anyone. So there are things that get said in a rugby field. Joe Marler got this massively wrong. First and foremost, Carl Dixon, as the referee, said he didn't hear it. We've all heard the audio now, the clips that come out. How he didn't hear that is beyond me. And I get it. He perhaps didn't want to put himself in a position where he's an ex-Quins player, having to send a Quins player off, potentially. I've spoken to a top-tier referee, as I do, because TMO Andy is in the house.
Hello, Bracey. Happy New Year.
No, it's not. It wasn't.
Pick your brains on one thing. The Joe Marler incident. What do you think?
I'll put it.
Would you have heard that?
I'll put it on.
What would you have done?
I'll put it on record that it's not Andrew Brace, but another very high-profile referee I have spoken to, and he said it's 100% a red card. If you hear it, it's a red card. So first,
Barnsley would have red carded him.
Yeah.
If it's him you've spoken to straight away. I'm trying to think about the ones that would have, but I think Carl Dixon had his Harlequins earmuffs on, didn't he?
But this is the problem. So whoever's put Carl Dixon as referee for a Harlequins game, and whether you think Carl Dixon heard it or not, you've put him in a position where people judge him now as an ex-Harlequins player. You should never be refereeing Harlequins. And that's not a slight on him. That's just putting him in a position where people will question him. He's obviously played for Harlequins for 7 or 8 years or however long it was. He knows these players. He might be friends with some of them still. They might hate him. Who knows? And I know some of them didn't like him particularly, and some of them loved him. But you sit there and you think, who's put Carl Dixon in that position? That's the first thing that's wrong.
Oh, it's Bill. Bill, the guy who's asleep. I reckon it's him.
There you go. Secondly, you're looking at Joe Marler and you're thinking, you're an idiot. For saying those things, you're an idiot. Whether Jake Heenan's mum's in hospital with cancer or not, he didn't. I don't believe Joe Marler did, but who's ever called someone else's mum a fucking whore twice to their face? I don't know.
That's the one. Goody, that's the one, right? As in all this, right? And I'm all for sledging. I think growing the game with the banter and that kind of interactions that you have, I'm up for it. I think there's a place for it. I think you should be 100%. Able to have a bit of crack.
Yeah, and I was like that as a player.
Yeah, and I was as well. And the thing is, with that, in what you've just said, and I think there is no grey area or there's nothing up for debate. I don't think I've heard anyone call, another player's mum a whore. I find it really weird even saying that kind of phrase. And I think that's the thing in all this is what's kind of been said. And look, Joe's a player in which he divides opinion. Me and him have got history. I actually quite like him. I'll be honest. I like his character. I think he's weird. He's quirky. I respect him for that. But he is a player, depending on what mood he's in, on what game, and how he's feeling, and you can see that goes onto the pitch with him. He clearly wears his emotion on his sleeve. For whatever reason, he weren't happy in that game. Like, apparently he stamped on him in the ruck before. He said it a couple of times, and he was in that weird mood that he's got history being in. And again, one of the things that's really interesting, but I watching things play out on social media, and people are saying, like, you know, if he was in an office and stuff like that, then he'd get sacked. Mate, you're not in an office. It's very different. I'm not at all saying that, like, what he did is right. It was completely out of order. It was disgusting. But you can't compare being on a rugby pitch to being in an office. That's my thing.
No, I know you can't. But the thing on it is, you also can't compare the game 5 years ago to what the game is now. We're talking about the modern game. And the key in the whole statement that was made by the disciplinary panel and the head of the disciplinary panel, Gareth Graham, he was talking about the modern game. So the modern game is very different to 10 years ago, to when Jim and I played. There's no place for that in the modern game at all, is there? And you go back 20 years and things might have been said and done, and I think Lawrence said it on TV. He said back in the day, you'd have been able to self-police that and he'd have got filled in. But no one can punch now, so, you know, you can say stuff, and there's too much of that in the game where people are whooping and hollering in other people's faces trying to get a reaction because you know you're not going to get filled in.
Unless you're Ross Moriarty and Sione Kalamafoni and you start throwing down heavy mitts.
Yeah, well, Ross Moriarty doesn't even throw a punch, does he? He just tries to rip his scrum cap off, and then he's just trying to wind Kalamafoni up. But we'll get onto that later. So for me, you know, it's a disgrace from Marler, what he said, and he deserves a punishment for it. Now, the second issue on it is the RFU disciplinary panel. I've said things on here around what we've seen in Australia with Darcy Swain and what we saw in France with Anton Dupont, and sometimes the joke that is the disciplinary process in other countries. Well, you can add in the RFU to that now because there's clear guidelines around what Joe Marler did in the World Rugby laws and the sanctions for it. And what the RFU have done is circumnavigate those by saying that we are charging Joe Marler under the RFU rules. I think it was 5.2 or something of bringing the game into disrepute and bad sportsmanship and all that stuff, which means we don't have to adhere to the World Rugby sanctions, which a low-end decision on that hearing with World Rugby sanctions would have been a 6-week ban. A mid-range was 12 weeks and a top end was 18 weeks, maximum 52 weeks. So that's the framework that World Rugby have looked at and said, for that sort of behaviour, they're the sanctions. Now, the RFU have circumnavigated it and said, we've charged him with an RFU break of the rules, and in doing so, we don't have to abide by World Rugby's sanctions list. And that then opens up a can of worms because what they've done is said, right, we're going to give them a 6-week ban, which is the low-end one, but what we're going to do is we're going to suspend 4 of them. We think it's appropriate to suspend 4 of them for a year. And I'm like, hold on a minute. There's no good behaviour there. He should have had a 6-week ban. They shouldn't have been able to circumnavigate the World Rugby sanctions, and the disciplinary panel are a joke. Whoever was on it, I know Gareth Graham was the guy that put out a strongly worded statement. You've put out a strongly worded statement and followed it up with absolutely weak actions by suspending 4 of his weeks of the 6-week ban. So he's got a 2-week ban effectively. So 1, Marler ridiculous for doing it. 2, the disciplinary panel, which Gareth Graham and 2 I don't know who the 2 other people were on it, but they're just as culpable. Just ridiculous. And, you know, World Rugby need to, when Jim talked earlier about there's going to be a big change, World Rugby need to sort of rule with an iron fist and say, these are the sanctions across the whole game. You don't get to circumnavigate it by RFU doing one thing, Australia doing another, the French doing another. It has to be one rule for everyone. And that's the way to get to sort of clean the game up.
Blame Laporte is what I say.
And he's corrupt as well. He's corrupt.
That's what I mean. That has been swept under the carpet, though, hasn't it? Like, as in, do you not think that has gone quiet?
Well, no, he suspended himself from all forms of rugby.
He suspended himself.
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. Well, he's got some budgie smugglers on the way to him, so hopefully he can be wearing them. We gave them to him, didn't we? Did we give them to Bernard Laporte?
Yeah, sent them to him.
Oh mate, he's got them. He'll be wearing them. But he's the one who started it. It was Dupont. Ours got changed, and the fact that Bernard Laporte's not seeing any time in the nick, that's where it's all started. So we can blame the French for this, I think.
Pod. Rugby pod.